Alice Walker's Possessing the Secret of Joy is one of the most beautiful books I have ever read. I felt so many emotions reading this, from curiosity to mystery to wanting to cry to profound understanding. Walker takes a character who first appeared actually in The Color Purple and builds an entire story around her struggle between cultures. She is a Lincoln, which is not a real ethnicity, but she is from a West African society. She is a Lincoln, but she's also exposed to Western society through Adam, Bolivia, going to Europe, and going to America. And throughout the novel, she desperately wants to belong to her community and remain loyal to her people. However, Walker shows that belonging can come with devastating consequences. A community is demanding conformity. Tashi's search for identity reveals that the cost of belonging can be one's own body, their mental health, their family relationships, and ultimately their life. One of the first things that Walker establishes is how important being a Lincoln is to Tashi. Early in the novel, she scoffs at Olivia. She does not think that Olivia is authentically Black anymore. Olivia has adopted Christianity. She wears clothes and styles her hair in a way that appeals to white people and embraces Western customs. Tashi sees this as a rejection of your African identity. The situation becomes more complicated because Lincoln traditions are tied to resistance against colonialism. We learn about our leader, who's a man who fought white colonial rule and became almost this kind of revered religious figure within the community. He advocated for preserving African traditions and believed that circumcision was necessary to keep women pure. And because of this, circumcision becomes more than a cultural practice. It becomes a symbol of loyalty to the community itself. The tragic irony is that Tashi already knows how dangerous the ritual is. Her sister Dura was one of the girls forced to undergo genital mutilation, and Dura bled to death when she was around 10 years old. Tashi witnessed the aftermath and was traumatized by it. Yet she still chooses to undergo the procedure later in life because she wants to belong. She's mocked by other girls for having naturally occurring parts on a female body. She's treated as impure, incomplete, and even demonic, and remaining uncircumcised makes her an outsider in her own community. What Walker is revealing to me here is that communities often enforce conformity through shame. The benefit offered to Tashi is acceptance, cultural legitimacy, and a sense of belonging. The cost is the loss of bodily autonomy, illness, future birth complications, and eventually nearly every aspect of her well-being. Tashi undergoes the procedure because she believes it will make her whole within her community, and instead it becomes the beginning of her destruction. The physical and psychological consequences of Tashi's decision form some of the most powerful moments in the novel. The irony of Tashi's journey is that the ritual meant to connect her to her people instead alienates her from herself. The trauma begins with Dura's death, and for years Tashi struggles to process what happened. She remembers hearing her sister scream, but also not being able to hear her scream. And the memory exists in fragments, and it's buried beneath years of repression. Later in the novel, she experiences literally a painting frenzy after seeing a video that reminds her of the initiation ritual. She faints, wakes up, and begins obsessively painting a male chicken that walked around the feet of the young girls who were waiting their turn. This scene stood out to me because it shows trauma returning through your art. Tashi finally begins describing Dura's death as what she truly believes it was, a murder. The community calls it tradition. Tashi eventually recognizes it as just violence. The trauma follows her everywhere. She has recurring nightmares, she sees psychiatrists, and repeatedly checks herself into mental hospitals. The narrative even introduces Evelyn, which is basically Tashi's American alter ego. Rather than becoming more secure in her identity after circumcision, Tashi becomes fragmented, and she's constantly running from her memories that refuse to stay buried. This is why the novel is so heartbreaking. Tashi undergoes the circumcision because she wants a stronger connection to her community, and instead she loses her connection to herself. And the very thing that is supposed to provide belonging leaves her isolated, haunted, and psychologically broken. Walker explores how trauma can create issues within our closest relationships and turn our safest spaces into a nightmare. This is most obvious in Tashi's marriage to Adam. When we first encounter them, Adam and Tashi are clearly in love with one another. They love each other. Their relationship is passionate and meaningful. However, circumcision affects every aspect of their marriage, and they struggle to have intercourse because of what was done to her body, and then the consequences continue even after they have a child. Birth of her son Benny is extremely difficult because of Tashi's infibulation. Benny was born with disabilities, and Tashi blames herself. She believes her circumcised body is responsible for the complications that occurred during childbirth, and this guilt just becomes another burden she carries with her for the rest of her life. And at the same time, Adam begins an affair with a woman named Lisette. While his actions are unquestionably harmful, Walker gives him some semblance of humanity. Adam is not simply portrayed as a villain. Ultimately, what drives the couple apart is the physical and emotional damage caused by the circumcision. The affair is not a story just about infidelity, though. It is another example of how trauma spreads outward and damages the people closest to us. Tashi wanted a stronger connection to her community, but the decision she made in order to belong ends up isolating her from her own husband and burdening her relationship with her son and worsening her mental health overall. The climax of the novel shifts from victimhood to resistance. Tashi ultimately murders the woman who performs the circumcisions in the Olinkan community, named Melissa. What makes this section so interesting is that Walker allows us to see Melissa's perspective too. We kind of jump a whole bunch of different perspectives in the book, primarily focusing on Tashi, but we hear from other points of view, including Lisette, and now including Melissa. We learn about her life, her beliefs, and the reasons she continues this practice of violence. It gives a lot of insight into how and why hurt people end up hurting other people, especially for the sake of cultural protection and maintenance. By killing Melissa, Tashi transforms from a victim into a survivor, and this is all within the prose. She actively challenges the honored community member responsible for so many young girls' mutilation. And the act is not presented as simple revenge either. It is presented as a rejection of the system that destroyed her sister, damaged her body, fractured her family, and haunted her entire life. Afterwards, Tashi's put on trial. She's found guilty, and she's sentenced to a public execution. Yet the reaction from the community is a bit fascinating. The men largely want her punished. Surprise, surprise. Fork found in kitchen. They see her as someone who has attacked tradition itself. But many women, however, see her as a liberator. They bring gifts to her, and they sing her songs, and they hold up banners expressing support for her. Even when, conservative men tried to silence them, they continued to sing for her. This book makes you question how community, something we hear time and again, is supposed to bring us closer together through oppressive social norms, can actually tear us apart. The community becomes divided because some people believe preserving tradition is more important than protecting human beings. And if we blindly follow tradition for the sake of preserving community, we end up hurting the next generation, the ones who inherit the community and its traditions. By the end of the novel, Tashi reaches a state of understanding that feels almost spiritual. She comes to the realization that belonging should not require suffering. One's cultural identity has incredible value, but traditions that demand pain and silence and sacrifice and loss of bodily autonomy will destroy the people they were supposed to protect. Ultimately, Tashi's search for identity reveals that the cost of belonging can be devastating. When a community demands conformity at the expense of human well-being. Through her trauma, her fractured identity, her damaged relationships, and her final act of resistance, Walker argues that true belonging cannot be built on suffering. Tashi spends her entire life searching for acceptance, only to discover that no community is worth destroying yourself for. That realization is what finally allows her to possess the secret of joy.